Probably the most comprehensive of these studies, again, is brought to us by COSO. And they tell us that 80% of ERM is immature if we look out at the different companies. They surveyed nearly 500 different companies. It is a bit of an older study, but it is the most comprehensive. It's a really good rate. It's somewhat straightforward. There is also other evidence of immaturity in this report where they tell us that 28% of companies regularly, only 28% I should say, regularly report on risk to top executives and use a systematic approach. What that means is that or I guess it's nearly 3/4 here if we add up the rest, don't have those formal practices in place. At best, they have siloed risk practices without effective communication out to executives and the board. And if we look beyond this, 33%, or I guess I should say only 33% of companies are satisfied with their risk management results. And in particular, this talks about risk oversight process, which is that reporting to the board, which is so critically important, and top executives. Moving on here, we can see that the majority of companies aren't really successful in achieving their objectives. And I want to point out two very important lines here. The first of those is their ability to seize real business opportunities through their risk management program. And then the second is the third item here, which is identifying risks across the organization. I'll leave it to you guys to take a look at this. We certainly can provide the content for you to peruse. So risk programs aren't altogether successful. But at the same time, we see a variety of different leaders inside of organizations asking for more. You know, the resounding tone that we hear from organizations is that we need to improve our risk management. We need to make advances. And companies are really looking for help. There is also standards. We talked about some of the frameworks, but there's also pressure, if you will, from other outside organizations. So it's not just coming from internal organizations. You may be familiar with a couple of these here. FSA is an organization in the UK that focuses on financial services. It's called the Financial Services Authority. And then there's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Of course, the NACD has a strong voice to directors to talk about the value of risk management to organizations. We already touched on S&P. So let's just review really quickly where the state of risk management and more broadly risk and compliance programs are in organizations. There's really a great appreciation for the need and value of risk management, but programs haven't really taken a strong hold inside of organizations, both large and small. I think the results of the little incredibly informal survey here is proof of that. But companies want to go further. They want to know what they can do, and we believe from talking to our customers that companies are looking for very practical guidance. They want to know what to do. They want less academic information about risk management and what risk appetite and risk capacity is. They want more of a recipe. They want more of a guidebook on how to put risk management practices into place. So leaders are basically asking for help, and let's explore what they need. We believe that they primarily need three things, or it falls into three categories. They need actionable ideas. They need things like roadmaps that are less theoretical, as I mentioned. They need very practical guidance, things like case studies and examples from companies that have been successful. And we'll have the great pleasure of hearing from Bruce later on about the success that they've had at Sybase with their risk and compliance programs. And then they need very simplistic information. As I said before, they want that recipe, that how-to, that gives very clear guidance on what to do. And on top of that, we believe that companies want context. They want, in essence, content for their particular risk scenario. It may be an industry scenario, it could be for a particular line of business, maybe even a finance scenario. Now let's just quickly take a look. One of the things that I wanted to do to prepare for this discussion here today, knowing that we'd be talking to finance leaders, is to sort of compare and contrast the success and standardization we have within the finance practice to risk management across a couple of different dimensions here. And if we just look at this, for example, we have trained and certified professionals worldwide, across the world for finance. In risk management, the profession is emerging. You can't take a class. Maybe nowadays you can, but if we rewind 18 months. You probably can't take a class at many universities on this. And there's a lot of diversity, or there's an ad hoc nature to the training that's available. If we look at finance, it's governed by specific rules and practices. You know, there's the alphabet soup that you guys are incredibly familiar with, starting with the SEC, AICPA, GAAP, IFRS, I could go on and on. That doesn't exist for risk management. There's a ton of, I don't want to say a ton, there's an enormous diversity in the practices as you move from one company to another that you won't see inside of the finance organization. There isn't that standard. There's audits. There's very standard audits performed by independent and external auditors for financial reports as well as internal controls. That isn't the case for risk management. Neither the reports nor the practices for risk management are audited. There's a ton of board involvement that's mandated in many geographies, especially here in the U.S., by legal mandates. There is board involvement in risk management. We're starting to see risk committees. We certainly see audit committees on boards, but there's no legal mandate. So I've given them sort of half credit here. Of course, for finance, there's incredibly standard reporting formats that you're using. Not only the public financial reports that you issue, but the standards or methodologies that you use for the internal management reports. That doesn't exist for risk management. No standard there. In fact, it's interesting to go and talk to a company. You find that the risk reports are sort of hidden away. The practitioners aren't on purpose, but they may even seem elusive. And then the last point here is there's supporting technology for sure that's been in place, very mature for finance. For risk management, it's there, but there's no standard with regards to how it's adopted and how content is used in conjunction with the risk management technologies that exist today. So I think it's really interesting to consider the strides that we as a group can make, whether it's vendors, the system integrators, as well as your companies can advance the practice of risk management here and contrast that with finance. The next thing I want to take a look at is what else is needed. And COSO outlines these 7 key success criteria that you can see here. Much of the advice is worth taking. Bruce is going to be talking about the involvement from the very top at Sybase and the success that played in the success of their risk and compliance programs. There's no doubt that that's critically important. But what I want to spend a few minutes talking about is where do you start with risk management? What risk do you start with? And I think we heard some great examples from THAC this morning about focusing risk efforts. There too often are boil the ocean approaches, and I'd like to contrast that with an alternative that I'll introduce to you here this morning that we call the 3 value questions, and linking your risk management efforts and priorities. Where do we start? And maybe where do we end as well? Of linking to value. THAC talked about, when he was talking about the risk part of his presentation this morning, 2 areas that he focused in. He said this is when he was talking about maybe jumping off of the building and how depressing that was, and we didn't need to hear about economic downturn and the impact of global climate change and the sea rising in Latin American markets. He said we really wanted to focus on 2 things. We wanted to focus on revenue recognition and our ability to deliver our product and get our revenue from our customers. And secondly, key customer projects. I'm going to suggest that these are 2 primary value drivers that we linked our risk management efforts to in Latin America. The first of those is customer satisfaction, and the second is risk. So we're gonna offer this alternative that we call the 3 value questions. And this really starts with instead of looking at every corner of your organization for every risk that pop up and have that list that THAC talked about, focusing on the value drivers and asking yourself 3 questions. The first of those questions is, where in your business do you drive value? What portions of your business are actually creating value? That could be revenue value, it could be shareholder value, it could be the accumulation of competitive advantage, it could be the relationship that you have with your customers. Really could be anything. The second question is what drives that value. What business processes and activities are you engaged in that specifically allow you to achieve the creation of value? And then the third question is what uncertainties, what risks, current or future, are linked to those areas that drive value and could potentially keep you from achieving your objectives in those areas. And my suggestion, just for conversation's sake here today, is focus your risk efforts, focus your prioritization by linking risk to value.